I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest.
Go Biden!
It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
This is, again, an attempt by Donald Trump to distract from the real issues of this campaign.
I'm going to punch him out, and I'm going to go to jail, and I'm going to be happy.
It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
Another truly heartfelt thank you to those of you who are taking time out of your day to listen to Divided We Fall, the podcast that will not be politically correct, will not be woke, and where no one is safe from being called out for hypocrisy, especially in today's episode. I want to explain up front that this episode is going to be loaded with audio clips. I mean, the majority of this episode is audio clips. The reason for that is many times, if you're only getting your news from the normal news sources, the big three, ABC, CBS, NBC, or even from the cable news channels, well, you may not hear both sides of the story. And I want everyone to hear the words straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But as always, before we get going, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. But most of all, please share with all of your friends. Divided We Fall will always be brought to you by AR Tactical LLC, Houston's finest concierge firearms company. They bring FFL transfers, LTC classes, and firearms proficiency training to you at your home, office, church, or wherever you're most comfortable. So go find them on Facebook and give them a like at AR Tactical LLC or call 346-465-5994 to discover how they can cater a class to your needs today. This is episode 4, Hypocrisy and Lies.
It is time to heal the wounds that divide us and to seek a new unity based on the common values that unite us. We are one people with one home and one great flag. We are not defined by the color of our skin, the figure on our paycheck, or the party of our politics. We are defined by our shared humanity, by our citizenship in this magnificent nation, and by the love that fills our hearts. At the bedrock of our politics will be a total allegiance to the United States of America. And through our loyalty to our country, we will rediscover our loyalty to each other. Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. We're the radical left lunatics, maniacs, and perverts. We are now in the process of defeating the radical left. These people are sick. To the maniacs on the radical left communists, the radical left maniacs, radical zealots and Marxists, our public schools have been taken over by the radical left maniacs. On day one, we will begin to find and remove the radical zealots and Marxists.
Donald Trump is going to be our president. We owe him an open mind and the chance to lead. Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power. And we don't just respect that, we cherish it.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did. And I take responsibility for those parts of it that I should. But Jane, it was like applying for a job and getting 66 million letters of recommendation and losing to a corrupt human tornado.
Our campaign was never about one person or even one election. It was about the country we love and about building an America that's hopeful, inclusive, and big-hearted.
But there wasn't this little tail of extremism wagging the dog of the Republican Party as it is today. And sadly, so many of those extremists, those MAGA extremists, take their marching orders from Donald Trump. And when do they break with him? You know, because at some point, you know, maybe there needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members.
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again. And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies. They are not our enemies. They are Americans. They're Americans.
With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make health care secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. But I give you my word. I give you my word. If I'm elected president, I will marshal the ingenuity and goodwill of this nation to turn division into unity and bring us together, because I think that the people are looking for that. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country.
If I wanted to, I could do an entire episode on the subject of hypocrisy in Washington and never say a word. I could literally sit here and let you listen to clips for hours where a politician from either side of the aisle pushed one item or another, and then I could play a clip of that same politician contradicting themselves in another speech. Now, I don't remotely claim in any way that this is exclusive to one party or the other. If you noticed, in the opening clips, I included both parties' frontrunners. Instead, this has become the norm of our governmental representatives in D.C. Say one thing, do another. Promise unity, promote division. And unfortunately, it's not limited to just campaign appearances and promises either. In 2020, when our country went down the COVID rabbit hole, we saw the true nature of hypocrisy and lies come to the forefront of our everyday newscast. Supposed staunch constitutional conservatives like my own Texas Governor Greg Abbott suddenly shit all over the ideas of personal liberty and responsibility and became an authoritarian overnight.
I am issuing an executive order authorized by Chapter 418. This executive order adopts for Texas the standards that have been set out by the President and by the CDC. It provides the following. Number one, every person in Texas shall avoid social gatherings in groups of more than 10. Number two, people shall avoid eating or drinking at bars, restaurants, and food courts, or visiting gyms. Simply put, there will be no dining in at bars and restaurants, and gyms will be closed. Provided, however, and this is very important, that the use of drive-through, pickup, or delivery options is allowed and, in fact, highly encouraged throughout the limited duration of this executive order. Number three, people shall not visit nursing homes or retirement centers or long-term care facilities unless to provide critical assistance. And number four, all schools in the state of Texas shall be temporarily closed, but this does not mean education stops. Instead, superintendents should continue to work with the Texas Education Agency to continue online or additional educational options. This order is effective at midnight tomorrow.
Now, I'm a Lone Star guy, born and bred Texan. I can trace my Texan lineage back 8 generations in this state. I pride myself on the fact that Texas used to be the beacon of freedom in the United States, the last bastion of the Wild West, if you will. But Abbott just proved that we're nothing more than a rhino-run autocracy. The governor on high can rule from afar, while we, the serfs, merely exist to be taxed. Even the now presidential hopeful Ron DeSantis of Florida, who is currently running his presidential campaign on the stand that he didn't shut down his state, fell victim to overreach.
Bars and nightclubs, effective 5 p.m. today, they're going to be suspended for 30 days in the state of Florida. I think you've seen a lot of things about people congregating at some of these things. We view that as something that could be problematic for spreading the virus. Stealth carriers, people who don't have symptoms, but then are nevertheless passing along or have such mild symptoms, is something that really nobody has a handle on that. If they're not meeting in those big groups, then the chance of that being passed on is less.
Now, on the flip side, let's take a look at the uber-conservative Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota, probably the closest thing to a true libertarian response to the pandemic. Governor Noem left her constituents to make their own health decisions. This isn't to say that she didn't overstep her authority a little, too. She did, in fact, close schools for a short period of time, but that wasn't enough for the mainstream media, so they attacked her with hit pieces nationwide.
South Dakota is, by any measure, one of the hardest hit states by the coronavirus surge happening in the United States in mid-November. It's averaged more than 1,000 cases every day in November, and Forbes has called South Dakota one of the 10 riskiest states in the country to visit. How, you might ask, is Kristi Noem, the state's Republican governor, reacting to this mounting public health crisis in her state? Quote, "It's a good day for freedom," Noem's spokesman said in a statement, adding, "Joe Biden realizes that the president doesn't have the authority to institute a mask mandate. For that matter, neither does Governor Noem, which is why she has provided her citizens with the full scope of the science and trusted them to make their best decisions for themselves and their loved ones," end quote.
That's right. Governor Noem informed her constituents of the dangers and the recommendations, and then let them make their own informed decision. That's what freedom is supposed to be, right? Well, obviously not everyone agreed.
Yes, you heard that right. Amid a rapidly worsening situation in South Dakota, Noem is making sure people know that if President-elect Joe Biden moves to institute a national mandate on masks, she won't be complying. Way to stay focused on what really matters there, Gov. Noem's positioning on a national mask mandate is consistent with her hands-off approach that she's adopted since March when it comes to dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Noem was one of a handful of governors to never issue a stay-at-home order, and she has been positively Trumpian in how she talks about masks and their efficacy.
This journalist, and I use that term exceedingly loosely, insinuates that what Noem's statement said was false, that the president has the authority to mandate all Americans wear a chin diaper. He's wrong, of course, but regardless, he goes on to attack Noem and her stance. But was it really warranted? If you dig in and look at stats, well, they show that South Dakotans only suffered 3,245 COVID deaths. Some quick math shows that out of the almost 1 million population, that means they lost between 0.3 and 0.4% of their population to COVID deaths. And we'll dive deeper into those death statistics from COVID a little bit later, maybe in a different episode. Meanwhile, if you were to look at the left-leaning Massachusetts, where the lockdowns were in full effect, you'll find 21,000 deaths for a population of almost 7 million. If you work out the percentage, it's almost identical, 0.3% and some change. They actually attacked her for leaving her population alone for the most part, to enjoy their freedom when it led to an almost identical death rate as the most restricted states on our map. By the way, the sites that I pulled those stats from are in the video description as well, in case anybody wants to check my math. But their hypocrisy didn't stop there. As the virus was just beginning to show itself overseas, then President Donald Trump took steps to try and keep it from even getting to our shores. Once it came to light that the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, was not only responsible for the virus in that it leaked from the Wuhan lab, but that they were also burying the facts of how bad the contagion was in their own country, well, he closed travel from China. And what did the mainstream media and Democrats do? They mocked him. They ridiculed and openly defied him, calling for gatherings in the Chinatowns of cities across America.
It's exciting to be here, especially at this time, to be able to be unified with our community. We want to be vigilant about what it might be on what is out there in other places. We want to be careful about how we deal with it, but we do want to say to people, come to Chinatown. Here we are. We're, again, careful, safe, and come join us.
A big show of support this weekend for businesses in Chinatown, hit hard in recent weeks by the fear surrounding coronavirus.
Local leaders hoping to show that visiting Chinatown is safe. WBZ's Tiffany Chen joins us live in Boston, where sales and spirits both got a boost today. Tiffany.
Katie, Ken, city leaders are urging people to come to Boston's Chinatown, eat at some of the restaurants to show that there's really nothing to be afraid of, also to clear up some of these misconceptions around the coronavirus.
There's really no more risk of coming into contact with coronavirus in Chinatown than anywhere else in the city.
Here at home, there are rising concerns about the Wuhan coronavirus. Philadelphia officials are hoping to give residents as well as restaurants and businesses a boost of confidence and support. Natasha Brown takes us to Chinatown, where the mayor visited today.
We have confidence that everybody's safe coming to Chinatown.
As a major show of support for residents and businesses in Chinatown, Mayor Jim Kenney and other city officials had lunch at the Ocean Harbor restaurant Thursday afternoon. They're hoping to quell rising fears about the coronavirus outbreak.
We don't want people overreacting to this international situation. We're under control here in Philadelphia and around the country, and we don't want people to stop coming to Chinatown and patronizing these businesses.
Never mind the fact that Trump in no way, shape, nor form led anyone to believe there was any reason to blame Chinese Americans, nor was there any portion of American cities that was more dangerous than another. He was clear from the forefront that he blamed the CCP both for the release of the virus and their subsequent cover-up. And when the virus started to rear its head in European countries, he issued a travel ban into the United States from those European countries that were the hardest hit.
After consulting with our top government health professionals, I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. These restrictions will be adjusted subject to conditions on the ground. There will be exemptions for Americans who have undergone appropriate screenings, and these prohibitions will not only apply to the tremendous amount of trade and cargo, but various other things as we get approval.
But it was a mere 2 months later when these same voices, who were so critical of the president's restrictions, along with their sidekicks in the media, of course, but worse, along with a great majority of politicians with an R behind their name, well, they all called for the complete shutdown of our economy. They shuttered our businesses. They closed our schools. They banned us from practicing our religion. They banned us from going to the gym. Suddenly, the freest nation on the planet was a police state. Americans found themselves the object of criminal prosecution for doing the things they were used to doing daily, like a simple trip to the ocean.
But not everyone is obeying those orders.
He cut him off!
Yep, this paddleboarder was arrested after refusing to get out of the water in Malibu. CBS 2's Amy Johnson has more on the showdown near the sand.
A paddleboarder is chased down by law enforcement for being out on the water at Malibu Beach.
Oh, he faked him out. Now he's going back out to sea.
All LA County beaches are closed due to the coronavirus and social distancing after crowds gathered on LA beaches early in the crisis.
Sheriff vote.
The incident caught on camera as the paddleboarder was taken into custody for disobeying a lifeguard and a surfer was cited.
What was once considered freedom of movement was now considered criminal. In the name of, quote-unquote, the greater good, the authoritarian fist of government tightened around the American people. But how did these rules apply to those officials who signed or enforced the new rules?
Nancy Pelosi is under fire today after surveillance video shows her at a hair salon getting a blowout and not wearing a face mask.
The optics don't look good. There needs to be a whole lot of explanation.
It's terrible. Nancy Pelosi is a hypocrite.
The most powerful woman in America can be seen with wet hair inside a salon in San Francisco. Problem is, under California COVID-19 regulations, clients cannot be serviced indoors.
Marnie, their messaging has been clear. Wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, and most importantly, stay home. But more and more politicians seem to be flouting their own guidance and orders, creating a political problem for some of the most vocal leaders in the fight to contain the coronavirus.
Most nights, Austin Mayor Steve Adler updates residents on the coronavirus pandemic from his home office.
This is not the time to relax.
November 9th looked different. In a pre-recorded video from his family's timeshare in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, Adler urged Austinites to stay home.
We may have to close things down if we're not careful.
Adler now says he regrets traveling by private plane with his family to Mexico after his daughter's outdoor wedding.
I'm sorry I took that trip. It was a lapse in judgment, and I want you to know that I apologize.
Also in Texas, Williamson County Judge Bill Gravel pleaded guilty to violating his own stay-at-home order. He'll pay a $1,000 fine.
I made a bad mistake.
In California, Governor Gavin Newsom apologizing for attending a birthday party at the high-end French Laundry restaurant in wine country, as his administration asked Californians to do the opposite. At least a dozen people from different households were at the dinner.
Well, I want to apologize to you because I need to preach and practice, not just preach and not practice.
And then the next day, San Francisco Mayor London Breed attended a gathering at the same restaurant with 8 people, while the rule in her own city only allowed for 6. San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo apologized for violating state health orders by attending dinner at his parents' home after urging his Twitter followers to cancel big Thanksgiving gatherings the day before.
COVID-19 is surging across the entire country at an alarming pace.
And in Denver, Mayor Michael Hancock urging people to change their Thanksgiving plans, including in a letter to city employees, asking them not to travel if they didn't have to.
We're going to be doing a Zoom so that we can at least see each other on Thanksgiving.
But then flying to Houston and on to Mississippi, where he spent Thanksgiving with his wife and daughter. In Missouri, a state senator and staff member tested positive for COVID-19 after a GOP Senate retreat last month that appears to have violated basic safety measures put forward by Governor Mike Parson's own administration. Photos posted by the governor show at least 15 people sitting around tables, most of them not wearing masks, and none of them 6 feet apart. The meeting took place during what was the worst period of new cases and hospitalizations since March.
The list on both sides of the aisle goes on and on, but you get the idea. In this case, what was good for the gander, well, it didn't apply to the geese. Even while making the rules, which they deemed necessary for our safety as part of the quote-unquote greater good, it seemed like they couldn't help but flaunt their hypocrisy. While the pandemic was raging, the self-titled Summer of Love riots were also in full swing. Suddenly, the rules seemed to be made on a sliding scale. Some municipalities issued different standards for gatherings, such as church services or family dinners, etc., than they issued for protests. One locale even went so far as to mandate that only 12 people were allowed for a gathering, but protests of up to 100 people were allowed. How in the world can that be seen as anything but hypocrisy? Another theme that emerged during this Summer of Love was the defund the police movement. During the height of riots, everyday people, through the highest echelons of Democratic leadership, suddenly wanted less police. Many jumped on the defund bandwagon, calling for decreases in police department budgets and an increase in so-called social workers to respond to criminal activity. Riots that yesterday were for George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, today were protests calling for the defunding and sometimes even dismantling of police departments.
If you've been to a protest or have been paying attention to the news lately, there's a good chance you've heard this.
Defund the police.
Defund police departments.
Defund the police.
It's a rallying cry that has gained traction following the killing of George Floyd by police and the outbreak of global protests against anti-Black racism and police brutality. In past high-profile cases of Black Americans being killed by police, activists have called for police reform. But now they're pushing for a more radical change, defunding police departments and reimagining what public safety looks like.
No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace!
Nationwide, this cry grew. Defund, dismantle. Some even called for the wholesale closing of police departments around the nation. But when you're on the side of leaving citizens unable to protect themselves, and you want to protest for defunding police, well, you run into a little problem. The following is a video posted to TikTok by an unidentified police officer in an unknown city.
So I come in this morning and we're informed there's going to be a protest to defund the police. Well, that's fine. I like protests. Except for they requested a police presence, for their safety at the defund police event. I shit you not.
Now, how's that for hypocrisy? I could literally sit here and go on for days, giving you examples just from the COVID/Summer of Love riot time frame. But I don't have to, because it wasn't just during COVID that the hypocrisy of our legislative lords and ladies was on full display. In 2016, the election of Donald Trump brought out some of the finest examples you could ask for. Trump, you see, was called a racist, even though he was once given awards by the NAACP. He was referred to as xenophobic against Muslims, even though he brokered multiple successful Middle East treaties. He was even called a Nazi white supremacist, even though he gave his daughter to be married to a Jew. My favorite, however, was when they said that Trump's divisive language incited violence.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. Maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick them.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome in anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
But Trump was the one inciting violence, right? Now, mind you, this was all being said before, during, and after the left was calling the 2016 election rigged and a sham, not only questioning, but objecting to the 2016 election results, even going so far as to call Trump an illegitimate president.
Manager Raskin, you'd been in Congress only 3 days when you objected in 2017. It's one of the first things you did when you got here.
I have an objection because 10 of the 29 electoral votes cast by Florida were cast by electors not lawfully certified.
Mr. President, I object to the certificate from the state of Georgia on the grounds that the electoral votes were not...
There's no debate.
I object to a certificate from the state of North Carolina based on violations of the Voting Rights Act.
There's no debate in the joint session.
I object because people are horrified by the overwhelming evidence.
Section 18, Title 3 of the United States Code prohibits debate.
I object to the certificate from the state of Alabama. The electors were not lawfully certified.
I object to the 15 votes from the state of North Carolina because of the massive voter suppression and the closing of polling booths.
There's no debate. There's no debate.
16
There's
to 1,
no debate.
And the massive voter suppression that occurred to African Americans.
The gentleman will suspend.
I do not wish to debate. I wish to ask, is there one United States senator who will join me in this letter
There's
of
no
objection?
debate.
The objection is signed by a member of the House, but not yet by a member of the Senate.
Claiming an election was stolen, you were told, are words that are insightful to a candidate's followers and cause people to respond violently. Claiming an election was stolen or not legitimate is something that a candidate should never do because he or she knows, or should know, that such a claim and such words can actually incite violent insurrection. But Democratic Party candidates for public elective office are perfectly entitled to claim the election was stolen, or that the winner is illegitimate, or to make any other outrageous claim they can. It is their absolute right to do so. And it is their absolute right to do so, irrespective of whether there's any evidence to support the claim. Democratic candidates can claim that an election was stolen because of Russian collusion or without any explanation at all, and that is perfectly okay and is in no way incitement to an insurrection. You've been doing it for years.
But can you imagine telling your supporters that the only way you could possibly lose is if an American election was rigged and stolen from you? And ask yourself whether you've ever seen anyone at any level of government make the same claim about their own election.
You can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
He knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did.
And it wasn't just 2016. The election of George W. Bush and his father, George H.W. Bush, the previous two Republican presidents, were both objected to by Democrats on the day the elections were to be certified before their respective joint sessions of Congress. But wait a minute. If questioning the results or even objecting to the results of an election is okay in 2016, and then again in the 2018 midterms...
If Stacey Abrams doesn't win in Georgia, they stole it.
Votes remain to be counted. There are voices that were waiting to be heard.
And I will not concede.
And I respect where you're coming from, and I respect the issues that you're raising. You're not answering the question. Do you think it was... You're not using the word legitimate.
Then someone please explain to me how it came to be that Donald Trump has been impeached for questioning, with evidence that cheating had taken place, the legitimacy of the 2020 election. I'm not going to discuss the insurrectionist January 6th aspect in this episode. I'm just questioning the hypocrisy in the Democrat trouncing of Trump for doing something that I just showed they've been doing for years. The truth of the matter, this happens every 4 years. In a last-ditch effort to retain power, or maybe just to impress their constituents, the losing side tries to prove that their opponent won through illegitimate means. Just like leading up to every election in history, the left side calls the Republican candidate a racist, a homophobe, sometimes even a fascist. Meanwhile, the right side paints the Democratic candidate as an overreaching, overspending big government stooge who's coming after our Second Amendment rights. That's not to say that they aren't any of those things, but just wait until one of them dies. John McCain, Republican presidential candidate in the 2008 election, drew the typical Democrat shots during his campaign.
McCain has hired the people who did the racist ad against Harold Ford Jr. in Tennessee to be part, in fact, the elitist. That's his campaign manager, Terry Nelson. He's also hired the same people who ran the campaign against him, saying that he has an illegitimate black child in South Carolina, when in fact he's adopted a Bangladeshi kid. He's hired just about every loathsome, dirty trick guy that has ever run a Republican campaign.
My name is Erwin Tang, and I'm the author of a new book called Gook, John McCain's Racism and Why It Matters.
But once he passed...
It's been mentioned today, and we've seen footage this week of John pushing back against supporters who challenged my patriotism during the 2008 campaign. I was grateful, but I wasn't surprised. As Joe Lieberman said, it was John's instinct. I never saw John treat anyone differently because of their race or religion or gender. For he considered it the imperative of every citizen who loves this country to treat all people fairly.
Seems like, regardless of the letter behind their name, if they didn't have two faces, they'd have none at all. But what happens when they can't be hypocritical? What do they do when they can't contradict their previous words in some glorious display of hypocrisy? Well, they just flat out lie. Honesty, being a virtue that Americans once prided themselves on, has become a punchline in some bad Washington joke. And again, neither of our two political parties are immune. It seems to be that lying in Washington is as normal as breathing, and probably just as detrimental to a politician's health if they stop doing either. Trump, while running for the 2016 election, promised to be the most conservative president in modern history. He ran on a platform of less spending, repealing Obamacare, and Second Amendment rights. But it was Trump who signed into law the largest single spending package in American history.
Help is on the way. President Trump just hours ago signed a massive $2.3 trillion package averting a government shutdown and providing COVID relief to millions of Americans.
And it didn't stop there. He signed multiple COVID stimulus and business rescue packages during his tenure, adding more money to our ever-growing national debt than any president before him. And during his first 2 years, while Republicans controlled the White House and both houses of Congress, he failed to repeal Obamacare as promised. But worst of all, to many of us true libertarian conservatives, were his snuffs to the Second Amendment. Red flag laws, an absolute affront to Americans' Second, Fourth, and 14th Amendment protected rights, when Trump had this to say.
We must make sure that those judged to pose a grave risk to public safety do not have access to firearms, and that if they do, those firearms can be taken through rapid due process. That is why I have called for red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders.
In the position
Or
of that
might
individual.
take the firearms first and then go to court, because that's another system, because a lot of times by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida, he had a lot of firearms. They saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second. But take the guns first, go through due process second. But take the guns first, go through due process second.
Or when ATF once again usurped Congress and just unilaterally created a law out of thin air banning bump stocks, Trump was on board. He even went so far as to sign executive orders to back up the ATF's newest overreach.
And don't worry about bump stock. We're getting rid of it where it'll be. I mean, you don't have to complicate the bill by adding another 2 paragraphs. We're getting rid of it. I'll do that myself because I'm able to. Fortunately, we're able to do that without going through Congress.
And I know, making the claim that there's lying in Washington is like a breaking news report to announce that the sky is blue or water is wet. But we can't mention dishonesty in our Capitol without specifically giving credit where it's due. Biden press secretaries Jen Psaki and now Karine Jean-Pierre have taken the art to an entirely new level. They are able to weave lies into their press conferences like the finest of artists. Granted, in their particular line of work, it's basically a prerequisite. I mean, if they were forced to tell the truth about this administration, well, the American people would truly be shocked to find out how inept it actually is.
Well, first, in that shot you just played, that soundbite, Todd, the White House press secretary lied again, which must mean we're on a day of the week ending. And why? This time about the president taking, quote, multiple times a week, unquote. This simply is not true. If you could show me transcripts of Joe Biden taking questions from the press 3, 4, 5 times a week, boy, I'd love to see that week sometime because it doesn't exist. Look, she also said that the president had a full schedule on Monday during that press briefing. That day began with him coming back from Delaware after 8 o'clock in the morning to the White House, and the day ended at 1:30 p.m. after a lunch with the vice president when he sat down with his COVID team. 1:30 p.m. If you look at his schedule, that's when the public events ended. Does that sound full to you?
Or how corrupt the Biden family actually is.
If he wasn't, then maybe you should tell us.
So here's the thing, and I appreciate the question. I believe my colleague at the White House Counsel has answered this question already, has dealt with this, has made it very clear. I just don't have anything to share outside of what my colleagues have shared, and so I would refer you to him and the DOJ. Just not going to comment from here.
Text message.
What I can tell you is I know that my colleague has dealt with this. He addressed this at the White House Counsel. I just don't have anything else to share.
House Oversight says they've got bank records showing a Chinese energy company paying 3 Biden family members through a third party. What were they paid for?
Look, I'm just not going to respond to that from here. Look, we have heard from House Republicans for years and years and years how the inaccuracies and lies when it comes to this issue, and I don't even know where to begin to even answer that question because again, it's been lies and lies and inaccuracy for the past couple of years, and I'm just not going to get into it from here.
Now, after investigations, whistleblowers, bank records, testimony, we know that none of it was actually Republican lies. It was all 100% truth. Imagine having to sit there in that hot seat and field those questions, knowing you're going to have to lie your ass off to protect your boss. Psaki and Jean-Pierre deserve movie contracts with the acting they gave the American people. But it's not only those who speak for our elected overlords who tend to spread the BS a little thick either. Sometimes they do it for themselves.
If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor under the reform proposals that we put forward. If you like your private health insurance plan, you can keep it.
If you like the plan you have, you can keep it. If you like the doctor you have, you can keep your doctor too.
We will keep this promise to the American people. If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period. If you like your health care plan, you will be able to keep your health care plan, period. If you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. If you've got health insurance, you like your doctor, you like your plan, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor.
Be it pushing a policy of socialized medicine on the American people, or maybe justifying a war that perhaps America never should have taken part in.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass murder. Weapons of mass destruction.
Or maybe it was just another empty campaign promise.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Washington is built on a bed of lies. But it's not exclusive to the D.C. elitists either. Their media minions are just as guilty at times. While Trump may have been the one responsible for the fake news moniker, they've been earning it for years now, knowingly pushing narratives that they know to be false. Again, on both sides of the aisle. Fox is just as guilty of this as CNN. And as I said in episode 1, it doesn't matter if the news is skewed in your favor. If it's skewed, it's still a lie. And until we start to call them out on it, until we start to demand true transparency in Washington and from our elected representatives, they'll go on spewing whatever BS makes them the most money from lobbyists. As for the media, the only way we can vote them out is through Nielsen ratings. But the great news for all of us is that we don't have to listen to the lies. We have the power because we have the off switch. Turn off the propaganda machines. Go outside. Go read a book. Go for a walk. Or better yet, go chat with your neighbor. Start some sort of neighborhood social gathering. Unity doesn't have to start at the national level. It can start locally just as easy, maybe even easier. And as I say, week after week, we have to become united as a nation. Not only to be able to withstand attacks from outside our borders, but to repel the erosion of our rights and freedoms from an encroaching government. But we can't do anything if we continue to let them divide us with their hypocrisy and lies. Because as the title says, my friends, divided we fall. Thanks again for checking out this week's episode of Divided We Fall. As always, the links to all the clips used in this episode are included in the video description. If you haven't yet, be sure to go like the video, subscribe to the channel, and most of all, share this with all of your friends, please. Maybe your share will be the spark that it takes to unite our nation once again.